Thanks for coming to part 3 of our series, Saints and Sinners, a series on the checkered history of the church. But before we begin, here's the greatest thing we saw on the internet this week. In the Community Marketplace Spotlight this week is our new singles group. This is an exciting and fun opportunity. This is an opportunity to... I'm just trying to... In the Community Marketplace Spotlight. In the Community Marketplace. Sorry. This is a chance to hang out in a social event.
Welcome to Eastlake Online. This is a condensed version of what we do live every Sunday at the Uptown Theater. We know it's not always possible or even preferred to be a part of what we do in person, so that's why we made this. Thanks for checking it out. In just a minute, someone is going to give a short talk that hopefully resonates with you and helps you interpret what it might mean to follow in the way of Jesus, because that's what this community is all about. Figuring out what it might look like to live life the way that Jesus did, except in our current context with cell phones, self-driving cars and stuff. We're a community where everyone is invited, included, and involved, no matter what. Though our physical location is in the budding metropolis of the Tri-Cities, wherever you're watching this from, we want to invite you to bring a bit of heaven into your heart. Thanks for catching us on the interwebs. If you're looking for more content, follow us on social media or keep checking our website for all kinds of resources that we hope are helpful. And now, this.
Can't sit back on your forming that. On my mind, our kids got bigger, but I'm climbing down the bastion now. You take me out to...
That is messed up, Brian. You're right. It's so it actually happened this week. I should preface it by saying that there was some footage of what's going on in Europe and in the bottom left corner, and then Applebee's commercial came on, and Applebee's had to come out with this apology, as if they controlled when their commercial was played. It was a thing, but we're glad that you're here. Welcome to Eastlake. My name is Brandon, the teaching pastor here. If this is your first time, you picked a great day to come check us out. We're a church that's trying to be a church for people who don't typically like church, and we are in part 3 of 4-part series called Saints and Sinners. It's a series looking at the checkered history of the church and trying to deal with it. If you're going to take your faith seriously, and I want you to take your faith seriously, I want it to inform your everyday life, then I can't just be up here talking about all the good things, painting over all the bad. You've met those kind of people, and you're like, you are not real, right? I don't know what your past is, but you have a past, and that's true. Everybody has a past. Everybody has a past, and if you're a guest and this is your first time, if this is your first time as part of the series, that's what this series has been about. Hey guys, the church has a past. We got to kind of figure this out and deal with it a little bit. For those of you who have come back, so this is part 3. We've done 2 parts for it. If you've missed either of the first 2, you can go to eastlaketricities.com/talks, or we have an app you can download and get on demand. But if you've been a part of those first 2 and you've come back, I want to say thanks. Thanks for allowing me to indulge in a little church history with you. I know it's a little bit more, it's like a different approach than what we're typically used to. It's a little bit more looking back on stuff. And I just think in terms of if you're going to deal with your past and your garbage, it's important to look at where we came from and how we got here in order to kind of inform what it looks like to continue to be a church that operates in the same vein of Jesus. We said that when Jesus met on a mountaintop with his disciples and he looked over Caesarea Philippi and he asked Peter a question, who do people say that I am? Some people say this and that and whatever. What about you? And Peter responds with, I think you're Christ, the Son of the living God. I think you're the Messiah. I think you're God incarnate. I know it's crazy for me to say this, but I think that's it. And Jesus' response to him is that. It's on that thing right there, that statement, that belief system, that what Christ came and what Jesus was is different, is what I'm going to build my church upon, and that the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And then he would meet a few months later with his disciples on a mountaintop and tell them, go into the entire world, preaching the gospel, telling them the good news that I've brought forth, that God is interested. He's in the here and the now. He's within reach. The kingdom of heaven is at hand, and do your part, making disciples and baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So anyways, that has been the mission of the church, and the tone was set early on. We said it was almost as if like Jesus taught his disciples a way to kind of sing the tune of the church and loving people, welcoming them in. The church was a place that didn't put people out. Basically, it was very inclusive. It brought in slaves. It brought in women. It brought in all kinds of stuff. Socioeconomic barriers were not a part of this thing. It was a unique sort of piece, and the church got it right for a really long time. In fact, we said, really, our perception, sometimes it's hard for us to kind of grasp the goodness of it because we're so used to the church operating kind of as a bully sometimes. Like in our modern day context, the church can be perceived of as the bully, right? They're the ones in a position of power and privilege and telling people what they should believe and kicking people out for not doing it and leveraging. And every politician tries to claim some sort of Christian heritage because they know it gets the right voter block in and all kinds of stuff. It's leveraged in all the wrong ways. And it's really operated a lot of times as a bully. And then, but what I said was for the first 300 years, the church was the bullied. They were the ones on the receiving end of it. They were not in a good spot. It was dangerous to be a Christian. In fact, the entire time that the audience, that were alive in the audience of when the original text was written in the New Testament, the church was in a position of being bullied. And it was in those moments that it probably stayed closest to the original tune of what Christ wanted it to be, right? In those moments, they were able to kind of nail what it means to love your neighbor as yourself, to turn the other cheek, to all of this kind of stuff. It was great. And then what happened, as we said in week one of this thing, everything sort of began to change in about 400 AD. Historically looking back, Constantine, the emperor of Rome, becomes a Christian, makes this Edict of Milan, which makes it so that Christianity is a viable option for people. And all of a sudden, like church gets intermingled with power and politics, and it begins to kind of go sideways. And all of a sudden, there's like this up and down history of the church. We called it the sawtooth history of the church. There's good moments, there's bad moments, right? There's ups and there's downs. There's times when the church is operating, it's really close to the tune of what Jesus Christ, I think, originally mentioned. And then sometimes it's really off key, right? Sometimes it's like, man, we've all watched the person who performs the national anthem and they try to do too much with it. And you're like, you know what? Let's just stick to the original. Don't try and do too much with it. That you're out. It's not great to listen to. And we've said that. And we've been on those sides of things. So maybe you're approaching this series from somebody who's been on the bullied side of the church. Like you feel like I've always had something against the church because of the way that they've operated. Maybe not anybody specifically, maybe not Eastlake specifically, or whatever church background you came from, but just in general, that can be the case. And so I think it's important for us to kind of look back and realize, listen, the church in the sawtooth ups and downs history of the church has gone through a couple of different phases. One, on one side of the spectrum is abuse, on the other side is reform. Abuse and reform. Since 400 AD, there has been, it's like this cyclical kind of piecemeal moving towards either abuse or reform. In the side of abuse, people have heard, go and make disciples. And what was said was go and make disciples. What they heard was go and make them disciples, right? Which are two different things. That's by the tip of the spear, but that's by a go and be a missionary in this culture, but really like transform their culture, like tell them what they need to believe, and if they don't, kill them, whatever, I don't know, all this kind of stuff. They hear, be holy as your heavenly Father is holy, or whatever, or they hear Jesus saying, if your eye makes you sin, pluck it out, and what they actually do or whatever live out is, if your neighbor's causing you to sin, do whatever you need to do it. In so many different forms of abuse, and specifically church abuse, there can be a Bible verse that's attached to it. It's amazing how many times you can see something that's completely antithetical to what Jesus taught, and yet they have a proof text verse of this is, such and such. It says in Matthew chapter 7, this, blah, 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 or whatever. So it's not enough to be like, well, what does the Bible have to say about it? It's a difficult thing. There can be abuse in all kinds of forms, and there can oftentimes be a Bible verse attached to it. And if I were to ask any of you, probably in this room, hey, are you familiar with any sort of modern day abuse within organized religion? I doubt you'd be stumped for an answer, right? It would be shocking for you to be like, man, I just can't think of anything. Everything seems pretty hunky-dory in this way, right? You would say, have you seen the size of some of these mega churches, right? Have you heard the most recent scandals? Have you watched the Righteous Gemstones? I mean, so many things that could possibly stand out in this way. And so on one side, absolutely abuse exists, has existed, continues to exist in this way. And on the other side, what's the beautiful side of it is every once in a while, there's some reform within the church, right? And reform is essentially somebody saying, hey, that's probably not the best way to go about that. hey, what if we did this a different way? Sometimes it comes in the form of individuals, saints, monks, priests that we read about in history, and you can go back and look through this. Sometimes it resolves itself in movements, larger sort of participatory reforms. The Protestant Reformation in the 1500s was a push against what they saw in the established Catholic Church and kind of this movement back towards it. We see it show up in Jesus' time. Jesus shows up in the temple one of these days. Early on in his ministry, unknown figure at this point, steps in, pulls a scroll out to be able to read in front of people, reads from Isaiah chapter 58, and one of the texts, or part of the text, sounds like this. It is not this the kind of fasting I've chosen, to loose the chains of injustice, untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free, and to break every yoke. He would continue on, read this long extended passage about what it would look like, this day of freedom, or this kind of thing. And then he would say, this passage today is fulfilled within your presence. He's offering a type of reform. You guys have been signing up and doing religion in a certain way, but I'm telling you, I think there's a better way to do it. Let me invite you into something different. And then he would go off and teach in his parables and teaching his wisdom things and do the Sermon on the Mount and heal people and all kinds of stuff. So this is important. And here's why reform is important in our history, right? So many of the things that you and I take for granted in a modern day society that has a healthy, I think, somewhat separation of church and state, has healthy religious liberty. What we love about America is the freedom to be able to assemble, the freedom to worship, the freedom to choose, that we're not forced to go to church, we get to choose it, that we're not forced into religion, even if it was our own religion, that we're aware enough to be like, that doesn't seem like the healthiest way. In fact, in week 1, we said, if you have to force people into your religion, it probably means your arguments are weak and your reasoning's not solid. Like truth should be the only thing that binds and that holds people hostage to it, if they're going to be hostages to the truth. But all of those things, that sort of mindset came out of Christian reform, came out of reform from within the church, not secularism, not like, the church is getting too involved in this. This was the church going, we don't like it when the state is involved too much with the church because these things get muddy. And we think it would be better off if we separated these two types of things. And it started with Constantine and his Edict of Milan. It kind of moves on forward with all of this. Disentangling the church from the state was a product of Christian reform. The concept of charity, the reason you like the idea of charity, the reason that when people give to things, when you see businesses brag about how much they give back to their community, that's a positive thing for you, that the reason that businesses do that because they think it sends a good message to you. The reason that that's such a positive, feel-good thing is charity was birthed out of Christian reform. It was birthed out of people going, what if we took our faith seriously? And those who have a lot should bless those who have a little. It has its origin story in the church. That Constantine, one of his things, in addition to the Edict of Milan, would issue tax breaks to the church, which kind of comes across, and people always argue, well, the taxes, churches shouldn't be exempt from taxes. The reason it started in the first place was so that more money would be available for the poor. We shouldn't take money from them. That money goes to help kind of people in their constituencies. Now, I know that kind of falls into it once the church has used that for abusive means and selfish means. I get that. I understand that. But in its original story, that's why it existed in this way. Now, I want to do something. I want to talk about something real quick. And I realized I rewatched last week's talk. And I realized in a historical approach to preaching that sometimes what interests me may not interest you as much as it interests me, okay? Self-aware enough to be like, I'm going down some rabbit holes that I think some people are going like, where's the point of this? Okay, so here's what I thought about. What I'd like to do is to warn you when I'm going in the weeds. In the same way that when we approach a tunnel on a road trip with my kids, I say, there's a tunnel coming up. Everybody hold your breath. It's going to be over in about 90 seconds. And it's about that long. So if this doesn't interest you at all, it's going to be over in about 90 seconds, okay? But I think this is interesting, and I think it's worth your time. So first tunnel, we're going in the weeds for half a second. In the Middle Ages, there were 2 court systems. One was the state court, and the other was an ecclesial court. You could take somebody to court depending on what the topic was for what you're trying to sue or what you're trying to get resolved, depending on which court you went to. And one of the things that got resolved in the ecclesial court or the church court was somebody who was stricken with poverty, a poor person who was neglected by their rich neighbor, could appeal to the church courts who would compel the wealthy offender to consider options of generosity. If he could prove that I approached my friend, I asked them for help because I was in desperate need, I know he has a surplus of stuff, I think he should give it. There was a court system for this. The church court. This is absolutely true. And some of you are like shocked. Some of you are like, that's good. We should incorporate that. It's amazing. We'll figure out who you vote for in just a second. All right. The Act of King Edward VI in 1552 for the provision and the relief of the poor contained legislation allowing the poor to denounce a miser to the local bishop. Now, he had to prove that he did have a surplus and was hoarding it in that way. The bishop was then to induce and persuade him by charitable means and ways, whatever that included. Then, when they realized that didn't have enough teeth, a few years later, the Queen Elizabeth I of 1563 laid down that in the bishop's exhortations, if they were unsuccessful, if he wasn't able to convince or persuade this rich person to give to this poor person, compulsory contribution. Do you know what that means? That means you have to do this now, right? Could be assessed and collected under the pain of imprisonment, meaning there will be a special tax assessed for you. Why? Because you are rich and it's going to go to these poor people. Taxes to fund welfare programs were started within the church. Now, if you're a fiscal conservative who thinks that any tax money that isn't assigned to roads or national defense, but to care for the less fortunate is a misuse of funds or state-appointed theft, you have the church to blame for that, okay? That was the church thing. Now, if that's something you love, you have the church to thank for that. That's all part of it, okay? But it came out of Christian reform, looking at these things, going, Jesus said a lot about materialism. He said a lot about being blessed with a lot so that you can be a blessing. That shows up in our religion constantly. What if we took that seriously and actually begin to live this out? Charity was birthed within the church and then formalized and then adopted into, eventually, Constantine would defer all of their social reform and social welfare things to the church. And then eventually, over time, the government would then attach themselves to it. And now it's, we have welfare systems set up within our government. But that's not how it always used to be. Let's transition if you didn't like that. Now we're back out of the weeds. Welcome back, everybody. See? A little longer than 90 seconds. I apologize. But I think it's really interesting. The first hospital that we know about was built by Basil the Great in around 370 in central Turkey. It was formed by people who sat around, who were probably in a Bible study somewhere, and they said, well, what are we going to read today? Well, let's read the Good Samaritan, the story of the Good Samaritan. Somebody who took care of somebody else in their needs, came across somebody who was hurting and in pain and took care of them even though they looked nothing like them and were, again, really opposite kind of people. In fact, for Jesus in this fictional story to pick the hero as a Samaritan would have been what is the worst possible scenario in our modern day age for who would be most likely unlikely to help you, right? And you're seeing you on the side of the road and be like, they're just going to walk across the street and go the other way. And yet Jesus makes them hear the story. It was them saying, it doesn't matter if we believe things differently than them or see the world differently than them or vote differently than them or whatever, dress differently or whatever, all this kind of stuff. We have this obligation. When Jesus says to these people who are listening to the story that day, go and do likewise, are we going to take him seriously on this? So reform for them was, we should probably do it a different way. What if we created hospitals? Hospitals were started because of Christian reform. In fact, a lot of the hospitals that you go to, if you're ever in the lobby because something's happening upstairs and you don't want to be a part of it, you're like, I got to kill some time down here for a little bit. Or I get lost looking for the vending machines or the whatever. You'll see little stories about the heritage of where this hospital started and why it was started. And a lot of the time, it has to do with some sort of a religious connotation or religious heritage. Sanctuary cities, slave reform, the list goes on. Christian reform has been a huge part of making it. As much as we admire separation of church and state today, a lot of the things that you appreciate and I appreciate about how we live and what we live came as a result of Christian reform. Now, before you get too comfortable and patting yourself on the back, if you're a Christian, the cyclical pattern of abuse, or the cyclical pattern of the church is once you have this reform, it then slowly drifts towards abuse, right? So if it shows up there, it's going to show up in the other way, which is why I would love to spend the rest of our limited time together this morning talking about the Spanish Inquisition. Now, I bet none of you are expecting the Spanish Inquisition, right? If you haven't seen this, if you've only seen the meme and are not a Monty Python fan, or you didn't have a cool enough high school history teacher to play this clip for you when he or she taught about the Spanish Inquisition, you need to do yourself a favor. You have some homework this morning, but don't worry, it's going to be fun. In the notes section on the app, or if you go to eastlaketricities.com/notes, by the way, everything that's on the screen is always on that. I've also included a link to this about 2 or 3 minute sketch. There's 3 different parts to it. In every different part, it's 40 years old, so take it for what it's worth. But somebody's in a sketch, somebody has to say, I didn't expect the Spanish Inquisition, and then 3 cardinals jump out of the scene and go, nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition, right? And they begin to interview and interrogate and inquire about this person and force them to confess something they have no idea what to confess. It's a mockery. It's funny. It's sort of, we're far enough away to kind of make fun of the Inquisition, but if you ask somebody, what's bad part of the history of the church, right? The softballs are the Crusades, which we talked about in week 1, and then the Spanish Inquisition, or the Inquisition in general. It's the Inquisition, and then a subsect of it is the Spanish Inquisition. But it's a big deal. It's a huge deal. It's only funny because we're so far removed from it. And here's what we do know. Here's what's kind of interesting and sort of modern day stuff about it. Very little was actually known about the Inquisition. A lot of the details were hidden by the church, the Catholic Church, up until about 1998 when Pope John Paul II opened up the books in the Vatican to be able to kind of talk about what actually transpired. Previous to that point, it was simply legend or stories that were communicated mostly by Protestant preachers who were trying to paint Catholicism in a nasty light, and so stories are exaggerated, numbers are inflated to be that was so horrible, guys, in a way to kind of distance themselves from the Catholic Church, because it's the human thing to be able to, if we make somebody else look bad, it makes us look better. Unbeknownst to them, probably, it would come back and really just be a bad thing for the church in general, so that didn't work out that great, kind of shot themselves in the foot by making it a big deal. But as a result of it, John Paul II opened up the books in 98 and said, come, let's talk. Here's what we know about what transpired about 500 years ago, 600 years ago in this Inquisition. It happened over a 350-year period. It happened in places like England and Germany and France and Spain as well. And again, Spain was the really, really bad one and dark one. But what they found when they opened up is some things that didn't match perhaps some of the exaggerated policies or thoughts of what it was. Now, the Pope came out in March of 2000 and did a formal apology ceremony for what took place and transpired. Still, what the new information shed light on was that the history of violence involved in the Inquisition was probably not even in the top 10 worst things that have ever happened in the world, right? I mean, I'm going to talk about some numbers. I'm going to go into some details on it. Not to justify it and be it's fine, guys. Don't worry. People were killed for things they didn't even know they believed. And to be the church was good and justified in doing so. I don't believe that at all. But I do think that some of the details are important, especially for what it means for us living in today. So, real quickly, Inquisition always is a kind of a negative term, right? Anytime you hear about you watching the news and some businesses having an inquisition on their finances, it's oh, that's going to hurt their stock. Anytime a politician, there's been an inquiry into the dealings, backdoor dealings of some politician, it's usually, in our estimation, or at least if you've been around long enough, where there's smoke, there's probably fire. I mean, it's probably not great what's going on. Even on a personal level, if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, can we sit down? I have a question for you. It's not probably what kind of coffee do you like? It's probably something worse than that, right? So we're hesitant when it comes to inquisitions in that way. In the early part of the 13th century, the church set out to inquire about potential heresies. Now, let me define heresy for you real quick, all right? Heresy is choosing to reject some aspect of Christian belief and promote something else as the truth of Christians. So this church was obsessed in this period with heresy. Now, heresy is an in-religion sort of issue. It's for them trying to protect their own brand. If you didn't call yourself a Christian, you could believe whatever you wanted to believe. That's not heresy. You just have different beliefs, and we don't believe in those gods. But if you're trying to portray yourself as Christian, and then you promoted some sort of a doctrine that didn't line up with our set of doctrines, that's heresy. So they would go in and try and develop, and work on people within their quote-unquote church. And so Pope Gregory IX assembled a crack squad of theologians to set some people straight. Go out into the world, find out. We've heard stories of people saying that Jesus was just a guy or was not the Son of God, but that was kind of associated with his life afterwards, or that he died but he didn't really rise again. So go clean up the thought patterns of all of these people. And it is true that in 1252, they were authorized to do some torture to kind of work people into it. It's not great. Definitely not saying it's great, right? To be clear, go and make them be disciples is never the right option. I just want to preface that in case you send me emails later on being sounds like you're pro-Inquisition. I'm not pro-Inquisition, okay? Just to be clear. All right. I'm going to go into the weeds. One more tunnel coming up. Hold your breath. In the weeds part 2. This is the last one. The first Inquisition was initiated by the Vatican, right? The church itself started the Inquisition. It was so successful-ish that as a result, the state wanted to get involved. And really, it kind of evolved into a two-pronged approach. There was a state inquisition and there was ecclesial inquisition. The state one was far more ruthless. It was far more, what they realized is, again, state and religion are intertwined. If we can get them to believe certain things, we can fight against social unrest and get people in the right way. We can make them behave the way that we want them to behave. And so there really was, when they opened up the books in 98, they realized the state one was really bad. The church one, it seems like they were a little bit more generous and friendly and had better motives than the other way around, which led this guy named Thomas Madden, who wrote a book on this kind of stuff, to say, when we read what people say about the Inquisitions in the Middle Ages, the biggest criticism is that they're lenient, right? The biggest criticism that the state had about church inquisition is those people are too soft. They're too kind. They're too lenient. They take too much time. They're too worried about the rules of evidence and meticulous of ensuring that everybody's treated fairly. And this was a sort of great frustration to secular rulers. All right? All right. We're back up out of the weeds. Welcome back. It's good to have you. So, Inquisition, bad, not great. But definitely there was a bad rap involved that perhaps kind of jades the perspective of the church's involvement and or how bad it really was. And then you have, again, as I mentioned, that's speaking specifically of stuff outside of Spain, the Inquisition outside of Spain. The one inside of Spain was noticeably more harsh, and yes, absolutely, the church was involved in that. Anti-Semitism was a big deal on that one. Witch trials, higher numbers of capital punishment, higher numbers of deaths. Overall, 350 years, the estimates are about 8,000 people were killed for heretical beliefs about what they believe in, refusing to kind of come in line with all of this. And 8,000 is a big number. It's not great. What that means is, on average, the Inquisition executed about 18 people a year across its 350-year span. If you consider it to be kind of front-load heavy, and there was a lot more in the first 50 years and a lot less in the last 300. But again, 18 is too many. I get it. Go and make them disciples is always wrong. I just caveat. All right, my point is, 18 people on average per year would barely register a blip on the radar of human history of violence, right? I mean, yet for whatever reason, when we think of the church and its history, Crusades, Inquisition, like those are like, they feel awful, and they are awful. But you know what's really awful? And this isn't a game of whataboutism, but the Reign of Terror, the French Revolution, when France, the people of France saw the American Revolution go so well, they thought we could rebel against our leadership and our dignitaries and all this kind of stuff. We could establish a democracy here. And they begin to overthrow, do this kind of thing. And they thought, this is going to be the power to the people in all this way. And it was known as the Reign of Terror. In about 9 months, they killed 3 times more people than the Spanish Inquisition did and the Inquisition did over a 350-year period. 9 months, 350 years, 3 times more people on this side of things. Really awful. Like, really, absolutely terrible in this way. Robespierre, one of the big leaders of that French Revolution, said this: terror is nothing other than this is his new edict for the people. Here's how we are going to operate. This is the power to the people. This is what people power looks like. Terror is nothing other than justice, prompt, severe, inflexible. It is therefore an emanation of virtue that is not so much a special principle as it is a consequence of the general principle of democracy applied to our country's most urgent needs. This is what we want. We want justice, and when do we want it? We want it yesterday. The fact that we experience an injustice and there's a time period for us to do trial by jury or give people time or hear the whole story. That's not true. That's not what we want. We want consequences. We want immediate consequences when we feel like we've been miffed, right? Which shows up and translates into this idea of what's the secular critique about the Inquisition. They care too much about giving the people platform and too much time. They're kind of too lenient, and there's grace, and we got to create a burden of proof, and we have to do this. And it shows up even in today. Like, think about today's society. Think about when somebody tweets the wrong thing, when somebody puts something out there the wrong thing, what happens? They're crucified immediately, right? It's like, it's not wait, but I have something to say. I have a reason. No, you are done. You are never making a movie here again. Like, we don't even talk about Kevin Spacey anymore, right? He's off. He's out. We have all kinds of different stuff. We have different things. We just, even the fact that I said it, right? You're like, oh boy, we'll have to edit that out of the live stream later on. We do this. We want it justice. We want it fast. We want it now, and it is a bit dangerous on this way. What makes the Inquisition seem so much worse? So, and I'm not trying to put these two things on a plate. But what I want to say about it is what makes the Inquisition seem so much worse is that it was carried out by people who would read verses like love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, do good to those who hate you and bless those who curse you on Sundays, and then they would go out and do these kind of things Monday through Saturday and justify it and sit in a church and feel completely not guilty and somehow have the ability to disassociate what they're reading with what they're actually doing. And that's the problem. That's the problem, is that people would see that and be like, you know what? Like, you say you're a Christian and then you do that. And it just means so much worse. So, if you're a Christian, if you identify as this. Now, if you don't, this is a free Sunday. It's always a free Sunday here for that, for you, for people like you. You don't have to take any of this and do anything with this. But if you are a Christian, what this means is there's a higher standard at which we are called to. And you kind of know this, and you felt this. Why? Because when you lied about something, and you got caught in your lie, somebody goes, I can't believe you would do that. You're a church person. You're a Christian. And you go, yeah, and I still find ways to lie to get the things that I want. Like, I'm not perfect, and then you go into this idea of fairness, and it's unfair, and I'm still human, and all this kind of stuff. We immediately go in defensive posture mode, right? To be able to be like, wow, who are you to say? And I've been screwed before in the past, and all kinds of stuff. We go into this mode. When you have an affair, it means more. It just does. People are like, I thought he was a Christian. I thought she was a Christian. When you act like a jerk, I thought you go to church. Aren't you like a church person? And here's the thing. They're right. You're the ones who come in on Sundays and hear songs and sing about love and peace and all this kind of stuff. And then you're the ones that go home and don't do anything with it. We're the ones, and I'm not pointing the finger at you're the ones. That feels very aggressive. I'm like the most least aggressive preacher that you know. I'm preaching, there's a mirror somewhere around here, I'm pointing at myself. You're the one. Brent, you're the one who preaches all this stuff and then goes home and completely treats your kids like that or whatever, and you're going, and you immediately want to go, wow, you just want to get all big and puff up your feathers and be like, well, can't play that card on me. You're a Christian, right? Well, I don't know, whatever else. But it's true. That's the point. That's the thing. Why is the Inquisition? Why is the history of the church such a black market? There is a negativity associated with all kinds of, like, listen, you pick any nation, dig into their history, there's going to be some darkness, right? But in the church especially, because why? Because our accountability, because the tune, the music, the melody goes a certain way. And when it's off tune, even people outside of the faith know it's off tune. Like, you're doing too much of the national anthem, stick to the original. And you're like, The healthiest thing would be to say, you're right, I need to approach this differently. What we do is we hedgehog ourselves and buckle things out and try and make it angry. But that's not the right way to do it. We know that. Maybe, perhaps we. So how do we do this? What does this mean for us? This is why I think history informs. It informs why we're here and how we move forward with this. We should be people who own up to these mistakes, both corporately and be like, yeah, that was a terrible season of the church. And luckily for us, there's a lot of, after the pattern of abuse comes a thing of reform. But here's what I know too. Like, I don't want to rest on all the good things. Here's the pattern too. Like, whenever you're in a period of reform, there's a natural gravitational period to go towards negativity. There's a gradual pullback towards abuse. There's eventually, over time, if you're not careful and keep on top of this, it's not great. It's like when you leave on vacation for a couple of weeks and you come home, your yard is worse than when you left it, right? It always is. And if it's not, then you go to your wife and you go, did you hire somebody to mow our lawn? What happened? Nobody comes home and goes, our lawn looks better than, we should leave all the time. It's better. Nobody does that. It's always worse. Why? It has this natural entropy, like towards death, towards negativity. The church in its reform gets here, does really good on some things, and then the natural rut is to draw us back into it. And that's true both corporately, that's true individually too. So may we, in our little part of existence and in our exercise of living out what it means to follow in the way of Jesus, may we see this, may we understand this, may we live and point towards opportunities to be on the reform side of things, to go, how do I live this out in the right way? How do I take the teachings of Jesus, and when he says go and do likewise, I take him seriously, and I figure out what that means in my everyday life. And when I'm called to the carpet, when I fall short of those expectations, I don't buckle up and get defensive. I just simply go, yeah, you're right. I need to work harder, try better, do better, be more in tune with the gospel, be more in tune with the story of Jesus, be more in tune with my Savior. You're right. Apologize, do better, I'll do better. That kind of a humble approach, I'm telling you, changes the world. It's literally changed our world. That's not a figure of speech. I'm saying the things that you love in this world were changed because of people going, you're right. So may we be the type of people who corporately as a church Eastlake figures that out in our community, and then individually you, in your life, do it in your arena. Let's pray. Father, give us the wisdom to know what this plays out and how this looks like. Thanks for stories of this. Thanks for a history of it. Thanks for the humility of a pope to be able to open the books and deal with this on a small scale level, not to justify what happens, but to inspire us to kind of own up to our own garbage so that we can move forward and be better and more in tune with your gospel and with your son, Jesus. Give us the wisdom to know what that looks like in our life, the courage to act on it in your name. Amen. All right, next week, part 4. If this has been too far in the past, and you're like, Brent, there are so many issues that are currently wrong with the church and forms of abuse and all kinds of stuff, you don't want to miss next week, okay? We're going to talk about it then. And next week is the conclusion of the series, which means you always do communion together. It's also Selection Sunday for NCAA basketball. It's so glorious, everybody. It's the best time of the year, so don't miss next Sunday. Inside of your program, a couple of things I want to draw your attention to. One is a Connect card. It looks like this. On the back is a spot to be able to mark down some next steps. On the bottom is a spot for some prayer requests. If you got something that you're going through, we have a team of people, myself included, to read through these every single week. We would love to partner with you in prayer. On the front side is a spot for some personal information. If you're a regular tender, you know the drill. You should put your name at the top. We do ask everyone to fill one of these out. It's our only way of tracking who has or hasn't been here for a while. There's an E option as well on the app. You can do it and save yourself time and us time. If you're a guest, lower left-hand side, there's 2 boxes that says first or second time guest. We'd love to hear about it. We donate money to different organizations doing good things in our world and in our community. And for the month of March, we're donating money to the Ark of Tri-Cities. So let us know that you're here so we know how much to donate at the end of the month. There's also a giving envelope. If Eastlake's home for you, this is your chance to help us out financially to continue to create a church for people who don't typically like church. We couldn't do it without the countless people who make this a priority every single month. All of these things can go in the blue bins at the top of the ramp as you're leaving, and we will make sure they get to the right spot. The other announcement is that obviously some big changes with the mask mandate and stuff coming down and things opening back up. We've seen a nice influx of people. Welcome back, or welcome to some of you who are here for the first time or whatever. It's been great. If Eastlake is home for you, we are seeing more people show up, which is great. It just means more volunteer opportunities are needed. We need more people holding babies and passing out coffee and doing some things. If this has been a place that you feel like has invested into you and your spiritual journey, would you consider paying it forward and marking on the back spot of your Connect card, send me information about volunteering at Eastlake, and one of us will be in touch about different options for you. It doesn't have to be every week. You're not like giving blood, all this kind of stuff. And if you hate it, you don't have to do it again. But we just like the idea of everybody doing something so that nobody has to do everything. So anyways, all right, would you stand? I'm going to read a closing benediction for you and then get you on your way. Here's what it says. Lord, guide us to act, live, and pray as the times determine. Make our faith grow to accommodate the needs of your people and the fulfillment of your kingdom. Amen. May that go with you this week, whatever it is you're facing. If we've never met, I'll be in the lobby after this. I would love to say hello and put a name to a face. Other than that, see you back next week for part 4 of Saints and Sinners. Don't forget to pick up your kids. Have a good week. See you.